Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you a couple of ways to include CSS inside your web components. Now, each of these techniques has their own pros and cons, but yeah, I'm going to be showing you a couple of ways to go about doing it, as well as some general advice when it comes to styling your web components. Now, the example I'm going to be showing you in this video is going to be a table component. So this is actually taken from my previous tutorial on building a styled table using web components. You can find that linked down below if you're interested, or in my web components playlist, but if not, that's all good. Just for some context, this is basically just a component for an HTML table, and you're able to set data using this data property. I won't go into it, but basically it just populates each table row, and it looks something like this. For example, table.data equal to, and you can set that data there. In the browser, the table currently looks like this. So of course, let's use some CSS to style it up. Now, the first technique I'll be showing you here is using the style tag. So inside your shadow root, you can create a new style tag just like you would inside your standard HTML, and you can paste your CSS within there, or write your CSS within there. I'll Control V to paste my table CSS. Okay, I can now save this and go back in the browser, and as we can see, it is now styled. So it is that simple to add some CSS styles to your web component. Now, there are a couple of, disadvantages to using this technique. The first one is that there is no syntax highlighting for your CSS properties here. So, of course, that's just because this is treated as a standard JavaScript string. So VS Code or your text editor doesn't know which part is CSS and which part isn't. So you don't get syntax highlighting. Now, you could use some VS Code extension to essentially prefix this with CSS, and that's that could give you your syntax highlighting. There's a few extensions that do that, but then you have the issue of, well, this isn't actually CSS; it's actually HTML. So there are ways around it, but for the most part, yeah, you're not going to get that syntax highlighting. The second disadvantage would be the fact that you're combining your JavaScript logic for the component with the way it looks. So typically you want a separation of concerns here between your CSS style sheet and your component logic. But there is one big benefit to doing using this technique, and that is the fact that there is no separate network request to get the CSS styles. All of the code for your component comes from a single class, and that's it. So no second network request for the CSS style sheet. That's in comparison to the next technique I'm going to be showing you, which, requires an extra network request. Now, there are a few ways to improve this. Like I said, you could try and get the syntax highlighting to work through third-party extension. But I think one thing I would do is definitely take this CSS out and then make a new variable in your class called CSS equal to, use the template strings, once again, backticks near the 1 on your keyboard, and you paste your CSS inside here. I'll just indent it. And now we can use $ curly bracket in the style to just inject that CSS. Once again, only possible due to template strings. So we can save this, go back in the browser, and we get the exact same result. So yeah, that's your first technique, using the style tag. The next one is going to involve having a separate file to hold the CSS styles for your web component. So in my components directory, I'm going to make a new file called table.css. I'm using the same naming convention as the component file, so capital T, A-B-L-E. And within this CSS file, you can just simply put your CSS inside there instead. I'll copy all of this and paste it inside that inside that style sheet here. Then I'm just going to remove this variable and also remove this style and replace it with a standard link tag. Link rel for style sheet, href to components /table.css. So this here works just like your standard link tag inside the head of your HTML. You can simply reference your CSS style sheet. So if I save this, go back in the browser here, refresh, we get the same results. Now, one thing to quickly mention before jumping into the positives and negatives for this technique, I'm using a root relative link here. So I'm using a / at the at the beginning of this href. You may need to change your URL depending on your own setup. But yeah, in this case here, because I have my components in my public root here, doing / components table.css is going to resolve to that CSS file. Now, when it comes to the benefits and the negatives for this technique, well, firstly, there's a network request. So I think to me, this is probably the only real disadvantage to using this technique. There's going to be an extra request for each component to fetch its styles. Now, for a small application, that's probably going to be okay, but you need to keep that in mind when you're building for scale. Or if your application just gets really large and there's going to be a lot of network requests, at some point you may start feeling the impacts of having those extra requests. So keep that in mind. I think that there are a lot of benefits to using this technique. Of course, if I go back inside VS Code here, the most obvious one is the fact that, well, you get syntax highlighting, so you get to have those hints and so on. But also there's a separation of concerns. So the way your component looks is separate to the way that it behaves with your JavaScript logic. And you simply reference that inside here, which is of course fantastic. And I think one of the third benefits to doing this is that you can actually use something like SCSS, or you can use an external tool that allows you to build CSS or transpile it, whatever it might be. Because if, for example, you are using SCSS, you would just simply set your output directory to some public folder, and then you can reference it inside here. So you get that advantage of being quite easy to integrate with third-party tools or different workflows, etc. So that's your second technique, using the link tag. Now, I also want to mention something else, and that involves using the part CSS pseudo element. So what this does is basically you're also able to style your web components from your main CSS file on your web page. So we can see here on my HTML, I've got a linked CSS style sheet. This right here, it's just a normal CSS style sheet, right? But we're going to be able to style the components directly from within here. And the reason why that is, I guess, a bit of a maybe surprising statement is because your shadow root would typically protect your HTML from being affected by external styles. So typically, if, for example, I was to say table, let's just copy this selector. I'll just say T head, then I'll say TR. If I change the background color to be something like red here, save back in the browser, refresh, there is no change to that background color. Even if I remove this style, okay, back in the browser, it does not get applied because our web component is protected by this shadow root, and none of the CSS is going to affect it, right? Unless it's within this link tag. So how do we make this work from the main CSS file? Well, we're going to use something called a part pseudo element. So within here, I can actually give my table row for the header a part attribute. Let's make it equal to table-header, okay? So now I can reference this part within my main CSS style sheet. So I can say, just up here, styled-table : part, and then I'm going to paste in that part name. Let's just copy it first, table-header, and paste it within those brackets, okay? Now, keep in mind that this styled table comes from the fact that I've defined that as my custom element tag name, which is why that works. And now I can apply CSS styles as per I usually would. So I can just take this background color here, and I can change it to a red, for example. So I'm targeting the table header, which of course, again, is referencing my TR up there. Save this back in the browser and we get that red applied. Okay, we can see that it's actually taken precedence over this existing TR, which comes from that linked CSS style sheet, the table.css. Yeah, so you can use this technique as well when it comes to styling your web components, but keep in mind that the compatibility for this might be not so good in comparison to other methods. But yeah, look, if you have checked the compatibility table for : part, and it looks good to you, then you can potentially use this as a method. Now, one last thing that I want to cover is injecting CSS variables from your main CSS style sheet into your web components. So similar to using part, but this technique is not going to allow you to specifically set properties, but more set some variables. So let's say I want to, again, change the background color of the table header. Well, in my main CSS style sheet, I can target HTML, and then I can say --primary color equal to blue as an example. So this here, if you haven't seen it before, is a CSS property or CSS variable. And this is just saying that whenever I reference primary color inside some other CSS property, it's going to use the value of blue. So this behaves much like a standard variable, which you'll find in programming languages, right? So how would this now work for the web component? Well, I've got it defined in HTML, in the main root of the whole page, right? So I can now simply reference that inside the web component style sheet. So let's go back inside the table.css. This is also going to work inside a style tag, but just to keep this on the same page here, I can now say background color, then do var --primary color. So this now is going to grab onto the variable called primary color, which is defined inside the HTML. Save this back in the browser, refresh, and we get blue right there. To prove this works, I'll change it to be purple if I can, if that's an actual color here. I think it is. There we go. Save this back in the browser and it changes to purple. So we can see that, yeah, we can inject those values using CSS properties. And I think the main benefit I've seen of doing this is that if you have a theme for your website, you can easily standardize your theme across your different components. For example, a light theme and a dark theme. If you want to simply toggle that using CSS variables, then it's going to work really smoothly within your component. So that is CSS and JavaScript Web Components. If this video helped you out, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.